Alright, now I'd like to talk about Seth Rogen's new movie, An American Pickle, which isn't exactly a fetching title, but the story is kind of interesting, maybe a bit more interesting than it might sound at first. The only thing, because I didn't really know anything about it going in apart from the fact that he was playing two different characters. Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised with it. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but because when it starts off, we're starting off like 100 years prior to present day, and he's like a laborer, and he meets Sarah Snook, who he eventually marries, and then they immigrate to America, and he works in a pickle factory and eventually falls into one of the vats, gets enclosed in it, and somehow is preserved, I guess, and is not broken out of it until 100 years later in present day. Where he eventually shacks up with his, is it great great grandson, who is also Rogan. Uh, so, and a Rogan that's much more close to the Rogan that we know. Um, while the 100-year-old Rogan, who is named Herschel, kind of has a bit more of a sort of tough exterior and a sort of like the laborer's mindset, which is the exact opposite of your typical Seth Rogen character. So obviously there's going to be some clashing there. But what's interesting about this kind of immediately is it feels like there's a distance between this movie's humor and the humor that we typically see in Rogen movies. And so, like, when he first meets Sarah Snook and they're kind of dating, I guess you could call it, and opening up to each other, there's like a dryness to the humor that we don't really completely expect from a movie with Rogan, or that type of humor from him. It probably helps a lot that he and or Evan Goldberg didn't write it. It comes from a short story, I believe, or a series of short stories. And it's and while the humor isn't necessarily like over the top in the way we would expect from Rogan, it's not entirely that dry the whole time. It's mostly these kind of opening scenes, but then when we get to the present day, it becomes more of what you might expect between the sort of clashing of how different their characters are and where they come from. And we kind of get the transition in what I don't know if it's intended to be this movie's version of the 2001 time jump, where it goes from the bone to the space station, where it's we just kind of pan out and we watch the building kind of dissolve, kind of like the end of Gangs of New York. But then there is a drone that suddenly appears, and it's pretty much that drone's sole purpose is to say, "Hey, we're in the future now." The future being present day. So, and as far as him being preserved in the vat, there is something kind of. It might seem like lazy writing, but as far as like, just kind of brushing it off and it being a. I feel like it's actually better for the story in itself, the way they do this, where they pretty much just make the glossing over of the science of it into a joke. Where it's like, this is the, professor, and he's got his chart here that's going to explain how it is I was preserved for 100 years. And the explanation is happening as his narration is talking over it, so we never quite know for sure what it is. That's kind of a funny way to go around that, because it's one of those things where the more nitpicky audiences would have focused only on that, when that is by no means what the story is. So that was smart of them to kind of see that ahead of time. And then, yeah, it does kind of become the fish out of water thing that we've seen so many times. There's even references to, like, other kind of versions of this kind of thing, like when he's... And I'm assuming unintentional, because it's just said in passing. Because it's to show that Rogan's character, the new character, Ben, the character from present day, doesn't really take, like, his Jewish heritage all that seriously, which obviously mortifies Herschel. And he's talking about how, like, oh yeah, my bar mitzvah was Jumanji themed. Like, that's how seriously I take it. And so it's like, the idea that Jumanji is kind of the same concept of somebody coming from a different environment entirely and now being in, like, this sort of modern area. And that's basically what a lot of it is for a while. And we actually get some genuinely, like, touching moments here, like when they're looking at a family album and he's getting, like, the full history of, like, where... Because obviously he and Sarah Snook were still completely in love, and she was pregnant with their first child when he fell into the vat and got enclosed for 100 years. So he didn't have any idea where his family timeline went or if it even continued at all. And so when they're flipping through the album and he gets to see like every generation all the way back to his own son, it's a really genuine and nice moment. And there's a lot of like charming interactions here when he's like introduced to seltzer for the first time, which was like something that was really like it was like an end goal for him was to try like seltzer water 100 years ago, and now Ben can just make it. And it's like there's actually a really nice, charming moment when he actually sees that, and it's like it's played for comedy, but it's also like actually seeing somebody's dream come true in this really kind of absurd way because of its simplicity, really. And we get some of the expected stuff, which doesn't necessarily go unwarranted, like when it's Herschel talking, kind of seeing how Ben acts and the way he spends so much time on the computer, and it's like the way we sort of take technology for granted, and how like if the internet goes out for a second or something or slows down, that we'll just completely lose our minds, because it's probably happened to all of us. Not even taking into account the whole miracle that is. Louis C.K. also did a really good bit on that. Um, but that's kind of the portion of the movie that really had me, and the way that he actually, like, his two different performances are really engaging, like, to the point that you do fully take them as two entirely separate characters, and their interactions are done seamlessly enough that, I mean, there's times where it's like we get him from behind, you can tell it's a double, while the actual Rogan's standing in front of him, but for the most part, it's pretty seamless in the idea that you don't really focus on that, and you can just kind of, you get swept up in them being two different characters that are interacting face to face with nothing supposedly having to happen behind the scenes to make this happen. And then it goes into some weird directions, and me saying that might make it sound more exciting than it is, because it's actually the whole conflict is usually there's like, you know, the movie would be this, and then a conflict would come in towards the end and then would need to be solved, but the conflict is pretty much the plot of the movie after a while, which is obviously because of Herschel and his sort of old-timey knee-jerk reactions to things, lands them in jail because he decides that this... Well, there's a whole other storyline going on with Herschel where there is a billboard in the cemetery that Sarah Snug is buried in and their family is buried in that he wants to get rid of. So he needs to raise $200,000 to do that, but Rogan just lost his job because Herschel got into a fight with the people putting up that billboard and they landed in jail. And now they don't want anything to do with him or the apps that he's trying to build. So then there's a rivalry when Herschel decides, oh, I'm going to start selling pickles, then I'm going to make them myself. I'm going to get cucumbers and use rainwater and salt. And he's going to basically make a whole enterprise. And now you would think it would be like, oh, well, his app failed and Herschel is all about family. Like, that's the whole plot. And the whole reason he wants to keep the cemetery the way, like, in pristine condition is it's all about family. So you would think, okay, so the two of them are going to do this pickle business or whatever as a family, okay. But no, they are instant rivals. Because Ben said, like, you know, his ideas were stupid and stuff like that. So Herschel just went and did the pickle thing, and instead of saying, like, see, I'm not stupid, now we can do this, the rivalry is the plot of the movie. So, I don't... it feels like a weird direction to go in. And it feels so sudden when it happens, because, like, the way they, like, really have it out for each other feels really misplaced, and, like, there wasn't much of a build-up to it. So that feels kind of weird. Like I said, especially with the emphasis he has on family, it's weird that ends up being what the plot is. Like, it doesn't even match the first third of the movie or so, but... then it kind of goes into directions where Herschel becomes famous, and it starts doing a political allegory, which, while that can be funny, it feels like it's from out of nowhere. So that's kind of confusing. And that's pretty much what the whole middle portion of the movie is it's like, it feels like it's a lot of things coming from out of nowhere. Whether it be like, you know, animosity towards each other, or the type of style it's trying to take on in regards to where the comedy or the conflict or either one is coming from. It just felt really confused in kind of the middle there. Only occasionally finding its footing again, but then to only kind of fall into like this. It's like it wasn't quite sure what it wanted to do or be, and it kind of almost felt like it kept betraying its main character, specifically Herschel. But I don't know. But the thing is it's like you would think now that the rivalry is the plot, that the movie would be a bit cutthroat about itself. Like, oh, how bad will this rivalry get? But it's like the movie's even so, even when that's the plot, the story is still a bit. The movie itself, the tone is still a bit too light and nice about itself. That doesn't really. They don't really seem to commit to that either. So I don't know, but there. By the time we do get to the end, and it's kind of gone in a bit one too many of those, like, confounding directions, we do eventually get much more of an emotional payoff to Ben's character. And what's interesting about that is it felt like in that moment we were going in the wrong direction, and it was like, how did the movie even end up here? And it's like you just kind of don't care at that point. But then in that particular moment, in like the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, there's an emotional hit, and in any other movie it would probably feel really forced, but somehow it actually like kind of hit me a little bit. So like the fact that the emotional payoff actually did manage to work, and I think a lot of that probably has to do with the fact that like some of the more over the top things about the movie and the comedic nature of the movie didn't go too much to where they couldn't come back to something like that and have it still be sincere. Um, so that actually ended up working, the emotional beats, by the time it got towards the end. And the thing is the whole middle is so jumbled with all that stuff that it's kind of becoming unmemorable as it goes on since I've seen it. And I'm remembering more the stuff that did work, like when they're looking at the photo album or the Seltzer stuff or the emotional beats at the end. And it's like, I do feel like it says something that the good parts of it are good enough that they are significantly more memorable than the stuff that wasn't working. So it does kind of reach this middle ground. Like I said, as far as both of Rogen's performances go, it's like it could have easily felt like this was just Rogen dicking off. Like he's playing two characters, one of them has a heavy accent, and one of them's significantly different than the other, and stuff like that. And it's like, and maybe there's a point in time where he's biting off more than he can chew with the emotional beats, but he seemed to really take this seriously, despite the fact that there's still a comedic nature to the movie itself. I did think it came through that it seemed like he really took this seriously, especially the Herschel character, which it's probably more appropriate that he kind of took a bit more of a serious approach to it, and he was more prone to like the sort of emotional beats, which makes it all the more effective when the Ben character actually gets more to do, like emotion wise. So yeah, so overall by the end of it, I ended up feeling like that I did like it. That whole middle is a fucking mess, but overall, I feel like I do like it. So there is that. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and end this here, I guess, and we will continue with these sort of individual reviews to kind of fill in November before we get into December, when we're going to get into like award stuff and stuff like that. So until all that stuff, I think that's it.